Commander Zethkara walked slowly into the white room. His forearms shook as he moved toward the chair in the center. The lights were too bright. They hurt his crystal eyes. He had not slept well in months. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, human faces. The three judges sat behind a long metal table. They were all different alien species. One was tall and thin like a tree. Another had blue skin and no hair. The third looked like a giant insect with many eyes. They all stared at him as he sat down. "Commander Zethkara," the tall judge said. His voice was cold. "You have requested this hearing to give testimony about human warfare tactics, is this correct?" Zethkara nodded. His throat felt dry. "Yes, honored judges. What I saw during the war, what the humans did, the galaxy needs to know." "Begin your testimony," the blue-skinned judge said. She held a recording device in her hand. "Tell us about your first encounter with humans." Zethkara took a deep breath. Where could he start? How could he explain what the humans were really like? For 300 years, his people had conquered, world after world. They were the strongest warriors in the galaxy. They had never lost a war. Until they met the humans. "We thought they were weak," he began. "Our spy ships watched their planet for many years. We saw their television shows. We heard their radio signals. They were always fighting each other. We thought they would be easy to defeat." The insect judge clicked his mandibles. "Continue." "The first time we met them was near Centauri space. I was leading a patrol of 12 ships. We found a human vessel, drifting in space. It looked broken, like it needed help." Zethkara paused. Even now, years later, he could remember every detail of that day. The human ship was ugly. It was made of welded metal plates. Some parts looked like they came from different ships. Smoke came from several holes in the hull. Any normal species would have been sending distress signals, but the humans were quiet. "Captain Vorthak ordered us to board their ship," Zethkara continued. "We thought we would find scared refugees, maybe injured civilians. We were wrong." The boarding party consisted of 20 Zerathi warriors. Each one was 7 feet tall and weighed 300 pounds. They carried plasma rifles and wore full battle armor. They were trained killers who had fought on dozens of worlds. The human ship's airlock opened without resistance. Inside, the corridors were dark and filled with smoke. The air tasted of burned metal and something else, something organic that Zethkara could not identify. "We found 12 humans in the main cargo bay," he said. They were standing in a circle around their leader. She was a female named Lisa Baker. She was small, even for a human, maybe 5.5 feet tall. She had short brown hair and green eyes. Lisa Baker wore dirty work clothes covered in oil stains. Her hands were black with grease. She looked like a mechanic or repair worker, not a soldier, not a warrior, just a person who fixed things for a living. "Our translator told them to surrender," Zethkara explained. "We expected them to drop to their knees, to beg for mercy. Instead, Lisa Baker smiled." That smile haunted Zethkara's dreams. It was not a happy smile. It was not a scared smile. It was something else entirely. It was the smile of a predator who had been waiting for prey to walk into a trap. "I had never seen a species smile before battle," Zethkara told the judges. "In all our wars, no alien had ever smiled at us when we demanded surrender. Fear, yes. Anger sometimes, but never pleasure." Lisa Baker said something in human language. The other humans laughed. Actually laughed, as if someone had told a funny joke. Then they moved. The humans had no proper weapons, no plasma rifles or energy swords. They carried tools from their ship, welding torches, metal pipes, hammers. One human held what looked like a kitchen knife. "They should have died. In seconds," Zethkara said. His voice became quieter. "We were trained warriors with advanced weapons. They were civilians with repair tools. But they fought like demons." Lisa Baker moved faster than any human should have been able to move. She dove under the plasma rifle fire and rolled behind a pile of cargo containers. The other humans scattered. in different directions. Within moments, the organized Zarathi formation became chaos. The humans knew their ship perfectly. Every corridor, every hiding place, every weak point in the structure. They moved through the darkness like ghosts. They appeared from ventilation shafts. They dropped from ceiling panels. They came through holes in the walls that the Zarathi had not even noticed. 3 of our warriors died in the first 5 minutes. Zethkara continued. Warrior Kethaval was killed by a human who attacked him with a welding torch. The human burned through his armor and kept fighting even when Kethaval's return fire hit him in the chest. Another Zarathi warrior died when a human female dropped from an air vent and landed on his back. She used a sharpened metal rod to pierce the weak joint in his neck armor. She weighed maybe 100 pounds. The warrior weighed 300, but she killed him before he could throw her off. The third death was the worst. A young human male, barely adult by their species standards, had filled several containers with their ship's fuel. When Zarathi warriors cornered him in a storage room, he threw the fuel on them and ignited it with a spark from a damaged electrical panel. The explosion killed him instantly, but it also killed 2 Zarathi and severely burned 3 others. They turned their own ship into a weapon, Zethkara explained to the judges. Every tool, every piece of equipment, every drop of fuel became something they could use to hurt us. Lisa Baker was the worst of all. She seemed to be everywhere at once. When the Zarathi thought they had her trapped in the engine room, she would appear behind them in a corridor. When they searched the corridors, she would attack them from the engine room. She had done something to the ship's internal systems. Lights would go out just as she attacked. Doors would slam shut, separating Zarathi warriors from their backup. The artificial gravity would switch on and off, making the warriors stumble while she moved like she expected it. How long did the fighting continue? The tall judge asked. 47 minutes, Zethkara replied. 47 minutes of the most vicious fighting I have ever experienced, and I have fought in 63 battles across 32 worlds. The end came when Captain Vorthak finally managed to corner Lisa Baker in the ship's main engineering section. She was trapped with no way out. Her welding torch was almost empty of fuel. She had burns on her arms and a deep cut on her forehead. Surrender, now, and we will make your death quick, Captain Vorthak told her through the translator. Lisa Baker looked at him with those green eyes. Even cornered and wounded, she was still smiling. She said something in human language. The translator remained silent for a moment, then spoke in a confused voice. She says thank you for coming aboard her ship. We should have realized then what she meant, Zethkara told the judges. We should have understood the trap, but we were too focused on capturing her. Lisa Baker raised her welding torch one last time, but instead of pointing it at Captain Vorthak, she aimed it at a large metal cylinder behind her. The cylinder had warning symbols painted on it in bright yellow. She was standing next to their reactor core, Zethkara explained. A human fusion reactor that was already damaged and unstable. She used her last bit of welding fuel to cut through the containment field. The explosion destroyed the human ship completely. It also destroyed 2 Zarathi boarding craft and damaged 3 others. Captain Vorthak and 8 warriors died instantly. Zethkara and the other survivors were thrown clear by the blast, but many were badly injured. Lisa Baker chose to die, Zethkara said quietly. But she chose to take as many of us with her as possible. Even at the moment of death, she was still fighting, still trying to hurt us. The 3 judges sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, the blue-skinned judge spoke. This was your first encounter with humans? Yes, Zethkara replied. And it taught us that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong. The humans do not fight like any other species in the galaxy. They do not follow the normal rules of surrender or retreat. They fight until they are dead. And even then they try to hurt you. The insect judge clicked his mandibles again. What happened next? Zethkara closed his crystal eyes. The next part of his story was even worse. But the galaxy needed to know. They needed to understand what humans were really capable of. 6 months later, he said, we invaded their solar system. We thought we had learned from our first encounter. We were wrong again. Zethkara shifted in his chair. The memory of Lisa Baker's smile still troubled him, but what came next was worse. Much worse. The judges waited patiently as he gathered his thoughts. 6 months after the incident with Lisa Baker's ship, the Emperor decided to invade human space, he began. We had learned about their home system through captured data. They called it Sol. It had one main world called Earth, and several smaller colonies. The Zarathi Empire assembled the largest invasion fleet in their history. 30 dreadnought-class warships, each one capable of destroying a city with a single shot. 200 smaller attack vessels. 50,000 of the Empire's best warriors. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Krextha, a veteran of 40 successful conquests. Our first target was a mining station in the outer system, Zethkara continued. It was called Titan Station. Our intelligence said it had 50,000 human civilians and very few military forces. We expected them to surrender immediately. Titan Station orbited a large moon covered in ice. The station itself was huge, built to process materials from asteroid mining operations. It had living areas, work sections, and massive industrial facilities. Most importantly, it had no military shields and only basic defensive weapons. Attack should have lasted 1 hour, Zethkara told the judges. Maybe 2 hours if the humans were stubborn. Instead, it became a siege that lasted 4 months. Admiral Krextha sent the usual surrender demand. It was broadcast on all human communication channels in their own language. The message was simple. Leave the station within 24 hours or be destroyed. The humans responded 12 hours later. Their message was short and came from someone called Jake Morrison, the station commander. Morrison was not a military officer. He was a former asteroid miner who had been promoted to run the civilian operation. Morrison's response was only 4 words in human language, Zethkara said. Our translators told us it meant come and take it. We thought it was just brave talk from a scared civilian. The Zarathi fleet moved into attack position the next day. 3 dreadnoughts would destroy the station's main defenses while smaller ships boarded the facility. The plan was simple and had worked on dozens of other worlds. But when the dreadnoughts fired their main weapons, something unexpected happened. The beams hit the station, but instead of destroying it, they seemed to scatter and weaken. The station's hull glowed red hot, but it did not break apart. The humans had done something to their station, Zethkara explained. They had covered the outer hull with reflective materials, mining equipment, polished metal sheets, even mirrors from their living quarters. Our energy weapons were being reflected and dispersed. Jake Morrison had turned 50,000 mining workers into an army overnight, but not a normal army. The humans did not line up in formations or build traditional defenses. Instead, they did something no other species had ever attempted. They turned their entire station into a weapon. Helen Clark had been a maintenance worker who repaired air conditioning systems. Morrison put her in charge of explosives. She used mining charges meant for breaking asteroids to create bombs throughout the station. Every corridor, every room, every air shaft became a potential trap. Paul Rodriguez had run the station's main cafeteria. He knew every food storage area and every chemical used in food preparation. Morrison made him responsible for creating poisons and chemical weapons. Paul turned the kitchen into a laboratory where he mixed cleaning supplies with industrial chemicals to make deadly gases. The boarding parties were the first to discover what the humans had done, Zethkara said. His voice became quieter as he remembered. I led the 3rd wave of boarders. By then, we had already lost 200 warriors. The station's docking bays looked normal from the outside, but when Zarathi ships tried to land, hidden explosives destroyed the landing platforms. Warriors who survived the explosions found themselves trapped in damaged ships, while human defenders attacked from hidden positions. Inside the station, every step was dangerous. Helen Clark had placed explosive charges in the ceiling panels. When Zarathi warriors walked underneath, the charges would detonate and bring down tons of metal and rock. Entire squads were buried alive. The humans had also modified their life support systems. Air vents that should have carried oxygen instead carried Paul Rodriguez's poison gases. Zarathi warriors would remove their helmets in what looked like safe areas, only to breathe deadly chemicals that burned their lungs and blinded their eyes. The humans knew we needed to capture the command center, Zethkara continued. So they made the journey there as deadly as possible. Every corridor was a trap. Every room was a death chamber. The station's children were the most disturbing part of the defense. Human children as young as 10 years old crawled through ventilation, shafts that were too small for Zerathi warriors. They carried small explosive devices and communication equipment. They would watch Zerathi movements and report back to the defenders. When warriors tried to follow the children into the vents, they found that the humans had filled the shafts with broken glass, sharp metal, and more poison gas. Several warriors died trying to capture human children who disappeared into the station's walls like ghosts. Jake Morrison was everywhere, Zethkara said. He seemed to know every part of the station perfectly. When we attacked one section, he would appear in another area and destroy our supply lines. When we tried to trap him, he would vanish into the industrial areas. Morrison had been a miner for 20 years before becoming station commander. He knew every tunnel, every maintenance shaft, every hidden passage in the facility. He used this knowledge to appear where the Zerathi least expected him. The humans also learned to use Zerathi technology against them. Dead warriors had their communication equipment taken and studied. Within weeks, the humans were listening to Zerathi radio, messages, and learning their battle plans. Helen Clark figured out how to reprogram Zerathi explosives. She would take bombs from dead warriors and use them to create even bigger traps. Paul Rodriguez learned to extract poison from Zerathi medical supplies and mix it with the station's food and water systems. The worst part was the psychological warfare, Zethkara told the judges. The humans understood that our minds were as important as our bodies. The humans would capture wounded Zerathi warriors and broadcast their dying words back to the fleet. They learned enough of the Zerathi language to send false radio messages that led rescue teams into ambushes. They even learned to imitate Zerathi, voices well enough to give fake orders. Morrison organized the civilians to create sounds that drove Zerathi warriors to madness. They would bang on metal pipes in the walls, creating echoes that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. They would play recordings of Zerathi death screams through the station's announcement system. The humans also showed pictures of dead Zerathi to their prisoners. They would describe in detail how each warrior had died and what they planned to do to the next wave of attackers. Some Zerathi warriors broke down completely and refused to continue fighting. After 2 months, Admiral Krextha was forced to request reinforcements, Zethkara said. A simple mining station had stopped the most powerful fleet in Zerathi history. The siege continued for another 2 months. More Zerathi ships arrived, but the humans adapted their defenses. They learned to build new traps faster than the Zerathi could discover them. They created new poisons and new ways to kill. Jake Morrison himself killed 17 Zerathi warriors during the siege. He used mining tools, improvised weapons, and his bare hands. Security cameras throughout the station recorded his battles, and the other humans used these recordings to learn better fighting techniques. The end came when Admiral Krextha finally decided to destroy the entire station with nuclear weapons. But Jake Morrison had prepared for this possibility too. Morrison had hidden a nuclear device in the station's core, Zethkara explained. When he detected the incoming missiles, he triggered his own explosion. The blast destroyed not only Titan Station, but also 6 Zerathi warships that were too close to the facility. 3,000 Zerathi warriors died instantly. The explosion was so powerful that it damaged 12 other ships in the fleet. Jake Morrison died in the explosion he created, but his final message was broadcast to every human colony in the system. He told them exactly how his people had fought and what tactics had worked best against Zerathi forces. "We won the battle," Zethkara said. "Farty, we captured the ruins of Titan Station, but we lost 6 ships, 5,000 warriors, and 4 months of time. Worst of all, we lost our confidence." The blue-skinned judge leaned forward. "How did this single battle change your entire military doctrine?" Zethkara was quiet for a long moment. "Before Titan Station, we thought we understood warfare. We had rules about how battles should be fought. We believed civilians would always surrender rather than fight. We expected our enemies to behave in predictable ways. The humans broke all those rules. They showed us that any place could become a fortress, any person could become a weapon, and any material could be turned into something deadly. They proved that 50,000 civilians could hold off 50,000 trained warriors if they refused to give up. The three judges waited as Zethkara rubbed his crystal eyes with two of his four hands. The memories of Titan Station were bad, but what happened next was much worse. He had nightmares about New Eden every night for 3 years after the war ended. After Titan Station, the Emperor changed our strategy, Zethkara began. Instead of destroying human colonies, we would occupy them, control the population, use them as workers. We thought this would be easier than fighting them. The target was New Eden, a farming colony with 2 million humans. The world had green fields, clean rivers, and small cities scattered across 3 continents. The humans grew food and conducted scientific research. Intelligence reports said they had no military forces and only basic defensive weapons. General Vorthon commanded the occupation force, Zethkara continued. 100,000 Zerathi troops, the best soldiers in the Empire. We thought it would be a simple police operation. The invasion went perfectly at first. Zerathi ships landed in every major city without resistance. The humans did not fight back when soldiers took control of government buildings. They did not attack when Zerathi forces seized their communication centers. They seemed to accept occupation peacefully. For the first 2 weeks, everything was quiet, Zethkara said. The humans went to work every morning. They followed our orders. They provided food and supplies to our bases. We thought we had finally learned how to handle them properly. Zethkara was assigned to oversee the city of Riverside, population 50,000. It was built along a wide river and surrounded by farms. The humans there grew wheat, corn, and vegetables that fed much of the planet. They also had several schools and a small medical center. The city's mayor was an elderly man named George Adams. He met with Zethkara every morning to discuss the day's work assignments. Adams always smiled and agreed to every request. He seemed like the perfect example of a cooperative human leader. Mayor Adams introduced me to the city's important people, Zethkara explained. Carol Brown was the head teacher at the main school. She was a small woman with gray hair who spoke very softly. Danny White owned the largest farm outside the city. He supplied most of our fresh food. Dr. Lisa Park ran the medical center where our injured soldiers went for treatment. All of these humans seemed harmless. Carol Brown spent her days teaching human children about mathematics and history. Danny White worked in his fields from sunrise to sunset. Dr. Park treated both human and Zerathi patients with equal care. They all followed orders and caused no problems. The resistance began so slowly that the Zerathi did not notice it at first. Small things went wrong. Communication equipment would stop working for a few hours, then mysteriously start again. Food deliveries would be late because transport vehicles had mechanical problems. Soldiers would get sick with minor illnesses that kept them in bed for several days. We thought these were normal problems, Zethkara said. Equipment breaks down. Vehicles need repair. People get sick. We did not realize the humans were causing these problems on purpose. Carol Brown was the first to show her true nature. She continued teaching at the school every day, but her lessons changed. She taught human children about the layout of Zerathi bases. She showed them how to recognize different types of alien equipment. She trained them to move quietly and observe without being noticed. The children became spies. They played games that took them near Zerathi positions. They climbed trees and looked into military compounds. They counted soldiers and vehicles and weapons. All of this information went back to Carol Brown, who passed it to other members of the resistance. We never suspected the children, Zethkara admitted. They looked innocent. They smiled and waved when they saw us. Some of them even brought us gifts of flowers and drawings. We thought they liked us. Danny White was even more dangerous. His farm provided fresh vegetables for the main Zerathi base. Every day trucks would arrive to collect food for the soldiers. Danny always met them personally and loaded the vegetables himself. He was friendly and helpful and never complained about the large amounts of food he had to provide. But Danny was not just a farmer. He had studied biology and chemistry before starting his agricultural business. He knew exactly how to modify plants and soil to create biological weapons. He began growing special crops that looked normal, but contained deadly toxins. The poisoning started 3 weeks after the occupation began, Zethkara said. Soldiers would eat their meals and become sick within hours. Some died. Others became too weak to fight. The symptoms looked like a natural disease, so we did not suspect sabotage. Danny was careful to vary his poisons. Sometimes he used plant toxins that caused vomiting and fever. Other times he used modified bacteria that attacked the nervous system. He even learned to create chemicals that made Zarathi warriors go insane. For several days before recovering, the medical center became another weapon in the resistance. Dr. Lisa Park treated sick and wounded Zarathi soldiers every day. She always seemed concerned about their health and worked hard to help them recover. But she was secretly making them worse. Dr. Park learned Zarathi biology very quickly, Zethkara explained. She studied blood samples and tissue from wounded soldiers. She discovered which medicines would help us and which would hurt us. Then she began using the wrong medicines. Dr. Park would inject wounded Zarathi with substances that caused infections. She would give sick soldiers drugs that made their symptoms worse instead of better. She would recommend treatments that caused permanent damage to organs and bones. All of this was done with a smile and expressions of concern for their health. The psychological pressure was the worst part of the occupation. The humans made the Zarathi soldiers afraid of everything. They could not trust their food because it might be poisoned. They could not trust their medicine because it might kill them. They could not even trust the human children because they might be spies. Every human became a potential threat, Zethkara said. The farmer bringing vegetables might be carrying poison. The doctor treating wounds might be causing more damage. The child playing in the street might be counting our weapons. We started to see enemies everywhere. Mayor Adams coordinated all of these activities while maintaining his role as a cooperative leader. He would meet with Zethkara every morning and discuss city business in a friendly manner. He would ask about sick soldiers and offer to help find better medical supplies. He would suggest ways to improve food distribution and make life easier for the occupation forces. But at night, Adams would meet secretly with resistance leaders. He would coordinate poison attacks with Danny White. He would plan spy operations with Carol Brown. He would arrange for Dr. Park to receive the medical supplies she needed to harm Zarathi patients. The humans had turned their entire society into a weapon against us, Zethkara told the judges. Every person, every building, every daily activity became part of their war effort. They fought us with smiles and helpful attitudes while slowly killing us. The resistance grew stronger every week. More humans joined the network. They learned better ways to hide their activities. They developed new poisons and better methods of sabotage. The death rate among Zarathi soldiers increased steadily. Paranoia spread through the occupation force like a disease. Soldiers began refusing to eat local food even when they were starving. They would not accept medical treatment from human doctors, even when they were dying. They started attacking civilians for no reason except fear and suspicion. We were becoming monsters, Zethkara said quietly. The humans were making us paranoid and violent. We were afraid of old women and small children. We saw threats in every smile and kindness, in every cruel act. The breaking point came when a human named Kevin Martinez infiltrated the main command base. Martinez had been a waste management engineer before the occupation. He knew how to repair plumbing and electrical systems. Most importantly, he knew how to move through buildings without being noticed. Martinez got a job cleaning offices in the command center. Every day for 3 months, he would arrive with his cleaning supplies and work quietly in the background. The Zarathi soldiers saw him so often that he became invisible to them, just another human worker doing his job. But Martinez was mapping the entire facility. He learned the locations of important equipment. He studied the security systems. He identified the weak points in the building's structure. He was preparing for one massive act of sabotage. On the day Martinez struck, he arrived for work as usual. Zethkara continued. He cleaned offices and emptied trash containers. He smiled and nodded to the guards. Then he went to the main life support center. Martinez had spent months preparing for this moment. He had smuggled in small amounts of explosives by hiding them in cleaning supplies. He had modified maintenance tools to become detonators. He had studied the base's air circulation system until he knew exactly where to place his bombs. When Martinez triggered his explosives, every airlock in the command base opened simultaneously. The atmosphere rushed out into space in seconds. 3,000 Zarathi officers and soldiers died, almost instantly. The base's main computer systems were destroyed. Months of intelligence data were lost. Zethkara's hands trembled as he prepared to tell the most disturbing part of his testimony. The three judges had been taking notes quietly, but now they sensed something different in his voice. Something that made the crystal-eyed alien commander look older and more broken than before. "What I'm about to tell you," Zethkara began slowly, "violates every law of civilized warfare. It challenges everything we thought we knew about the nature of innocence and childhood. The humans showed us that even their youngest could become weapons of war. After the disaster on New Eden, the Zarathi Empire decided to prevent human civilians from reaching other worlds. If humans could turn peaceful colonies into resistance networks, they could not be allowed to spread throughout the galaxy." Then said, "Emperor ordered all human evacuation ships to be intercepted and their passengers processed for containment. My unit was assigned to patrol the space lanes between human worlds," Zethkara continued. "We were to stop any ships carrying refugees and take them to processing centers. It seemed like simple police work after the horrors of New Eden. The first ship they intercepted was called the Unity. It was a large civilian transport vessel, designed to carry families between colonies. According to the ship's manifest, it held 500 human refugees fleeing the war zone. Most of them were listed as children and their teachers. The ship's captain was Susan Clark," Zethkara said. "She had been a school principal before the war started, a woman who spent her life taking care of children and helping them learn. We expected her to surrender immediately to protect the young ones under her care. The Unity looked like a typical evacuation ship. It had civilian markings and sent the proper distress signals. Its crew followed standard procedures when ordered to prepare for boarding. Captain Clark even sent a message saying she would cooperate fully to ensure the safety of her passengers." Zethkara led a boarding party of 50 warriors onto the Unity. They expected to find scared refugees huddled in cargo holds. Instead, they found something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. "The children were waiting for us," he said quietly, "not hiding in fear like normal children would. They were standing in formation like tiny soldiers. The youngest was maybe 6 years old. The oldest was about 15, and they were all armed." 10-year-old Amy Johnson stood at the front of the group. She wore a school uniform that had been modified with communication equipment and protective padding. In her small hands, she carried what looked like a toy radio, but it was actually a military-grade coordination device. 12-year-old Chris Thompson led a squad of 8 children who carried sharpened metal rods and homemade explosive devices. His group had practiced moving as a unit and communicating with hand signals. They moved like trained soldiers despite being barely old enough to attend middle school. Even 6-year-old Emma Davis, the youngest of the refugees, had been given a role in the defense. She carried small packages that looked like toys but were actually bombs designed to explode when thrown. Her job was to get close to enemy soldiers by appearing harmless and innocent. Susan Clark had turned a school evacuation into a military operation, Zethkara explained to the judges. She had trained 500 children to fight like warriors. But they were still children. They had small voices and big eyes, and they called for their mothers when they were scared. The Unity's interior had been completely redesigned for warfare. Classrooms had been converted into defensive positions with overturned desks used as barriers. The school cafeteria had become a weapons factory where older children made bombs from kitchen supplies. Even the playground equipment had been modified into defensive weapons. The hallways were too narrow for Zarathi warriors to move in large groups, but perfect for small children to run through quickly. Emergency lighting had been adjusted to create dark shadows where young defenders could hide. The air vents had been enlarged so children could crawl through them like an underground tunnel system. The fighting began when we ordered them to surrender, Zethkara continued. Captain Clark looked at me with sad eyes and said that these children had already lost their homes and families. She would not let them lose their freedom too. Amy Johnson spoke into her communication device, and the child soldiers moved into action. They scattered through the ship with incredible speed and coordination. Within minutes, the organized boarding party became chaos as Zarathi warriors found themselves fighting opponents who were too small to hit easily and too fast to catch. The children used their size as an advantage. They could hide behind objects that would not protect adults. They could run through spaces that larger beings could not follow. They could climb on walls and ceilings using playground equipment that had been installed throughout the ship. Chris Thompson's squad attacked using swarm tactics. They would surround a single Zarathi warrior and attack from all directions at once. When the warrior tried to fight back, the children would scatter and regroup somewhere else. They were like a pack of small animals hunting a much larger predator. The worst part was their voices, Zethkara said, his own voice breaking. When they were hurt, they cried like normal children. When they were scared, they called for their teachers and parents. But they never stopped fighting. Even when they were dying, they were still trying to complete their missions. Emma Davis proved to be one of the most effective fighters despite her young age. She would approach Zarathi warriors with tears in her eyes, looking like a lost and frightened child. When the warriors bent down to help her or push her away, she would activate the explosive devices hidden in her toys. 3 Zarathi warriors died from Emma's attacks before they realized what she was doing. Even then, her innocent appearance made it difficult for soldiers to treat her as a real threat. The idea of fighting a 6-year-old girl violated every instinct they had about warfare in childhood. Susan Clark coordinated the defense from the ship's bridge, but she was much more than a military commander. She was also a teacher who cared deeply about every child under her protection. She would comfort crying children over the communication system while simultaneously directing them in combat operations. Captain Clark had somehow convinced these children that fighting was the right thing to do, Zethkara explained. She made them believe they were heroes protecting their friends and families. They fought with the dedication of true believers. The Unity's medical bay had been converted into a treatment center run by teenage students who had been trained in basic first aid. When younger children were injured, the older ones would carry them to safety and treat their wounds. Then the injured children would return to fighting as soon as they were able. The ship's library had become a command center, where the oldest children planned tactical operations and monitored Zarathi movements. 15-year-old students used textbooks about military history to develop strategies that confused and outmaneuvered professional soldiers. They turned education into warfare, Zethkara said. Everything they had learned in school became a weapon they could use against us. Mathematics helped them calculate explosion timing. Science helped them create better bombs. History taught them tactics used by famous military leaders. The battle lasted 18 hours. Wave after wave of Zarathi reinforcements boarded the Unity, but the children adapted their defenses to each new attack. They learned from each encounter and developed new ways to fight more effectively. The end came when Susan Clark realized that her children could not win a prolonged battle. The Zarathi had too many warriors and too much firepower, but she was determined that her students would not be captured alive and sent to prison camps. Captain Clark made the final choice that no adult should ever have to make, Zethkara said, quietly. She decided that death was better than slavery for the children under her care. Emma Davis volunteered to carry out the final mission. The 6-year-old girl took the largest explosive device on the ship and made her way to the main reactor core. She was scared and crying, but she was also determined to help her friends and teachers. Emma's last words were broadcast throughout the ship, Zethkara continued. She said she loved her mommy and daddy and hoped they would be proud of her. Then she activated the bomb that destroyed the entire vessel. The explosion killed Emma Davis and every other human on the Unity. It also killed 200 Zarathi warriors and destroyed 3 boarding craft. Susan Clark died on her bridge, still trying to comfort her students over the communication system as the ship broke apart around them. When it was over, we had won the battle, Zethkara told the judges. But we had also killed 500 children who fought like soldiers, children who cried when they were hurt but never gave up fighting, children who chose death over surrender. The blue-skinned judge was quiet for a long moment. How did this encounter affect your military? It broke something inside us, Zethkara replied. We were trained to be warriors, but we were not prepared to fight children. The humans had taken innocence itself and turned it into a weapon against us. Many of our soldiers refused to continue the war after the Unity incident. They said they had become monsters who killed children. Others became so angry they wanted to destroy every human in the galaxy. The war was tearing our society apart. The debriefing chamber fell silent after Zethkara finished describing the Unity incident. The three judges sat motionless, processing the horror of what they had heard. Children turned into soldiers, innocence weaponized, an entire species willing to sacrifice everything rather than surrender. Finally, the tall judge spoke. Commander, what happened after the evacuation ship encounters? How did the war end? Zethkara closed his crystal eyes and took several deep breaths. This final part of his testimony was the most shameful. It was the story of how the mighty Zerathi Empire, conquerors of dozens of worlds, had been forced to retreat by a species they had underestimated completely. 6 months after the Unity incident, Emperor Zarak himself issued the withdrawal order. Zethkara began. Not because we were losing battles, but because we were losing ourselves. The humans had changed us into something we no longer recognized. The decision came after a meeting of the Empire's highest military leaders. General after general reported the same problems. Soldiers refusing to fight. Mass resignations from the officer corps. Entire units demanding transfer away from human space. The Zerathi military was collapsing from within. We had conquered 37 worlds over 3 centuries, Zethkara explained. We knew how to defeat armies and capture cities, but we did not know how to fight a species that turned every person into a weapon and every defeat into a victory. The withdrawal was supposed to be an organized military operation. Phase 1 would evacuate non-essential personnel and equipment. Phase 2 would remove combat units while maintaining defensive positions. Phase 3 would destroy anything that could not be moved and make a final retreat to Zerathi space. Zethkara's unit was assigned to the final phase. They would stay behind to cover the retreat and ensure that no human forces could follow the main fleet. It should have been a simple rearguard action lasting a few weeks at most. We thought the humans would be happy to see us leave, Zethkara said. We expected them to stay in their colonies and celebrate their freedom. Instead, they followed us. They hunted us like prey animals. The human resistance had grown into something much larger during the years of occupation. No longer just individual cells operating on single worlds. They had become a coordinated network spanning multiple star systems. They had leaders, supply lines, and most terrifying of all, they had learned to think like the Zerathi. Tony Adams led the campaign to harass the Zerathi retreat. Adams had been a construction worker before the war, specializing in building bridges and roads. But years of fighting had turned him into a military strategist who understood both human psychology and Zerathi weaknesses. Adams seemed to know our withdrawal plans better than our own officers, Zethkara continued. Every time we tried to establish a defensive position, he was already there waiting for us. Every supply convoy we sent was ambushed exactly where it would cause the most damage. The humans had infiltrated Zerathi evacuation fleets from the beginning. People who had been prisoners, workers, or refugees were actually resistance fighters who had spent months or years learning alien technology and culture. They activated only when the retreat began, striking from within the Zerathi ranks. Maria Santos had been working as a mechanic in Zerathi ship maintenance facilities for over a year. She had access to military vessels and had learned exactly how to sabotage them in ways that would not be discovered until the ships were already in deep space. Engine failures and life support breakdowns killed thousands of evacuating Zerathi troops. Santos taught other humans her sabotage techniques, Zethkara said. Soon every Zerathi ship had to be completely inspected before launch. But we could not find all the human infiltrators. They looked like us after surgical modification. They spoke our language perfectly. They knew our customs and procedures. The psychological warfare continued even during the retreat. Humans would broadcast messages on Zerathi communication frequencies, describing in detail what they planned to do to any aliens who returned to human space. They would send fake orders that led Zarathi ships into ambushes, or caused them to attack each other by mistake. Every spaceport became a battleground. Humans had prepared explosive charges and hidden weapons at evacuation sites throughout their territory. What should have been safe landing zones turned into death traps where evacuating civilians and soldiers were killed while trying to reach their ships. Every fuel depot was sabotaged. The humans had learned which chemicals were needed for Zarathi ship engines and had systematically contaminated fuel supplies. Ships that managed to launch often broke down in deep space, leaving their crews stranded between star systems. The humans turned our own evacuation routes against us, Zethkara explained. They forced us to use longer, more dangerous paths through space. They made sure our journey home was as costly and humiliating as possible. The worst incident occurred when Zethkara's own transport ship was infiltrated by a human who had been posing as a Zarathi prisoner for 8 months. The human was Bob Taylor, an engineer who had volunteered for surgical modification so complete that even medical scanners could not detect his true species. Taylor had learned to speak Zarathi like a native. He had studied their culture until he could behave exactly like an alien soldier. He had even allowed himself to be tortured during interrogations to maintain his cover identity. For 8 months, he had worked and lived among Zarathi troops, waiting for the right moment to strike. Taylor was assigned to my personal staff, Zethkara said quietly. He helped plan our evacuation routes. He had access to our ship schedules and troop movements. I trusted him with my life, and he was planning to kill me the entire time. Taylor, activated during the final evacuation from New Eden. The transport carried 1,200 Zarathi troops and civilians, who were among the last to leave human space. They thought they were finally safe, heading home after years of nightmare warfare. Instead, Taylor had spent months preparing the ship for destruction. He had placed explosive charges throughout the vessel and modified the life support systems to become weapons. When he triggered his sabotage, the ship became a death trap floating in space. Taylor could have escaped, Zethkara told the judges. He had small escape pods available and knew our security procedures well enough to avoid detection. Instead, he chose to die with us. His final message was broadcast to every human colony in the system. Taylor's last words became a rallying cry for human resistance. Humanity remembers. Humanity comes for you. The message spread throughout human space and beyond, reaching alien civilizations that had been considering their own invasions of human territory. The transport explosion killed 1,200 Zarathi evacuees and destroyed 3 escort vessels. But more importantly, it demonstrated that humans would continue fighting even during the alien retreat. There would be no peace, no forgiveness, no return to normal relations. We realized that the war would never truly end, Zethkara said. Even if we withdrew completely from human space, they would remember what we had done. They would plan revenge. They would come for us eventually. The final phase of the withdrawal became a desperate flight rather than an organized retreat. Zarathi ships launched as quickly as possible, often without full supplies or proper maintenance. The goal was simply to escape human space before more sabotage could occur. Many ships never made it home. Some were destroyed by hidden explosives. Others broke down due to sabotage and were lost in deep space. A few were captured by human forces, who had somehow acquired space-capable vessels and learned to operate them. The humans had transformed from a pre-spaceflight civilization to a threat that could challenge us in our own territory, Zethkara explained. In less than 3 years, they had learned our technology, adapted our tactics, and developed new forms of warfare that we could not counter. The blue-skinned judge leaned forward. What was the final cost of the war to your empire? Zethkara was quiet for a long moment, calculating losses that still seemed impossible to believe. We lost 40% of our invasion fleet, over 200,000 military personnel, our reputation as invincible conquerors. Most importantly, we lost our confidence in our unity. The war divided our society. Some Zarathi wanted to continue fighting until humanity was completely destroyed. Others believed we should seek peace and apologize for our actions. Many simply wanted to hide in our home systems and hope the humans would forget about us. Insect Judge clicked his mandibles nervously. What is the current status of relations between your empire and humanity? We maintain complete isolation, Zethkara replied. No Zarathi ship enters human space. No human ship is allowed near our worlds. We have mutual agreements with neutral species to serve as intermediaries if communication becomes necessary. But we know the humans are still watching us. They have agents throughout the galaxy now. They have formed alliances with other species. They are building a military force that grows stronger every year. The tall judge put down his writing pad and looked directly at Zethkara. Commander, in your professional opinion, what would happen if another species attempted to invade human space? Zethkara met the judge's gaze with his crystal eyes, now dim with exhaustion and old trauma.